Good morning, and welcome to another edition of NJSBA at Your Service webinar series. My name is Lou Scamenti. I'm the Products and Service Specialist here at New Jersey School Boards. And today's webinar will be presented by Megan Diwonkowski of the Education Foundation Association. She's going to be kicking it off in a couple minutes. But before we start, I just want to go over a couple things. Today, we are recording this webinar for you. We will be sending it out to everybody who registered probably tomorrow morning, most likely. It'll also be available on our website. So we ask that if you find this information that we're giving you helpful, that you pass it off to other members within your district or foundation to let them know of the things available to them. We also are going to be having the questions and answers. So if you do have a question or answer, you can either do it two ways. If you have the ability to have audio, I can unmute you if you raise your hand and you can ask your question, or you can simply type it in the bottom of the right-hand bottom screen under the questions and answers, and we will get to them. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it off to Megan, and she will let you know how the Education Foundation can help you.
Hi, everybody. Can you guys hear me okay? Hopefully, yes, or as long as you can hear me, I assume they can hear me. Okay.
Let me share the screen. I gotta give you the screen.
Perfect. All right. So while Lou's doing that, when the New Jersey Education Foundation Partnership presented at school boards in Atlantic City, and we also had a booth in Atlantic City. And during that time, we talked with a lot of attendees about what they believed to be one of their greatest challenges with starting or maintaining an education foundation. And one of the stories we heard over and over again is we don't have enough volunteers to be on the foundation board, or those with an existing foundation said, our foundation board members are getting tired and we're not sure it's sustainable. So with that information, we decided to talk today a little bit during this webinar about what is involved with building a foundation for long-term success. And because I know in New Jersey, there are foundations in many stages of evolution, I will talk a little bit about the beginning steps, just because I think people do find that very helpful, and how those beginning steps really set you up for long-term success. So with that, all right, so hold on, I'm just figuring out, there we go. I want to cover a couple of basics just because it gets all of us on the same page, and will make for better discussion as we move through these slides and better understanding. So at the most basic level, what is an education foundation? An education foundation is a nonprofit. It is a 501c3 tax-exempt organization. It has its own board of directors, and it operates separately from the school district. It does need, however, to work closely and in partnership with the school district. However, they are two separate entities, and that's a really important detail to keep in mind as you establish your foundation and as you set it up for long-term success. As I'm sure most of you know, ideally a foundation is established to raise funds for the school district to cover the cost of programs that the school district budget can no longer cover. When you establish your foundation, you set up or you create a mission, and in that mission, the foundation board decides what parts of the school district programs it would like to cover. That means you may have an education foundation that says, we don't really want to cover athletics. And that is that's their prerogative. That is, if that's not a priority, that's fine. Others cover everything under the sun, from before school, after school, athletics, arts, music, STEM, you name it. So it's really up to the foundation board to make those determinations in partnership with the school district. They should understand the school district's priorities because that's how those decisions would get made. What does it mean to be a 501c3? That means that the organization must have its own policies, its own structure for operating. One thing that is important to mention when it comes to education foundations is that the foundation cannot influence legislation. It cannot participate in elections or funding a specific person for school boards. So, for a lot of nonprofits, that's not a big deal, but it is important to understand when you are an education foundation, you are closely tied to a government entity, and that government entity being the school district. So the foundation can't say, oh, we're going to back this candidate because they're really going to be great for the district. That is not appropriate. The foundation, however, can help with the marketing of a referendum if that is a school board's priority. It needs to be a very small percentage of its budget and its work, but that is something that a foundation can involve itself in. It just cannot back any political individual. I get this question at every single meeting, so I'm just going to go ahead and put it in here and answer it. An education foundation should not and does not compete with the PTO, PTA, Booster Club, Home Associate, whatever parent organizations or athletic organizations that exist in your district. It really should be, the foundation should be a partner of these other fundraising entities. And if you are at the stage where you don't yet have a foundation and you're in a small district, I am sure this is a top concern for your community, your parents, your schools. How do you differentiate all of these different fundraising entities? The foundation is really looking to fund the school district priorities. It should come at fundraising with a big picture point of view. A PTO, PTA, Booster Club is usually focused on one school, one sport, has probably a lower goal for fundraising. It's maybe focused on a specific project within a classroom. I do understand that if you are in a very small district, these lines can get gray real quick. So what I recommend is that you stay in constant communication. If you don't yet have a foundation, invite your PTO presidents to the table and have a meeting with them and say, we're setting up this foundation and our priority is going to be to fund programs for the district. And your job is to fund what's happening within the school. And maybe it's as simple as saying, if the fundraising goal for a project is over $1,000, that's something the foundation will work on. If it's something that's $200 for a field trip, that's something the PTO would work on. Share your calendars. Be sure you're not creating fundraising events on the same night. If you keep talking to each other, you will have great success in the long run. And ultimately, the foundation can give a grant to the PTO, PTA, or Booster Club. That's not a problem. So just keep the lines of communication open and know that you are not supposed to be competing with each other. If you are in a situation where everybody is already feeling a bit of competition, I also recommend go ahead and set up a meeting and start trying to clear the air, because in the long run, you won't be successful if there's that constant battle going on. An education foundation board is often made up of volunteers in the community. Think beyond parents, think about your businesses. It's really, individuals who want to have a positive impact on public education. And that's who is ultimately serves on the foundation board. And I will talk a little bit about later about Board of Ed members and or district administrators serving on the board. Here we go. So when you think about who can serve on your foundation board, and this is where a lot of people say, well, we want a foundation, and it could be the superintendent, it could be the BA, it could be a Board of Ed member, they know they want the foundation, they know the district can benefit from the foundation, and then they get stuck. Who's going to take this over? Who is going to run with it? Who's going to build this foundation? Because ultimately, it needs to be that separate entity. Parents are who everybody thinks of right away. That's great. Having a parent representation is of course beneficial and it makes sense. But what's really important is to think beyond your parents. That's a really small audience. Think about the retirees in your community. There are people that believe in public education that don't understand that they can make a contribution. And the way schools operate now, out of necessity, the schools feel very far away and very removed from people that don't have children in the district. You can't just show up at a school. You can't even be on school property, during a lot of hours. So retirees and people that aren't necessarily have a reason to participate in the schools maybe feel very removed, but they maybe believe deeply in public education. Those are people that could be an outstanding board member, as well as community leaders, alumni. Don't be afraid of young alumni, even college-age alumni, if they happen to still be living at home. They understand the schools. They have a commitment to the schools and an appreciation for them. So don't hesitate to think about them as board members, as well as local business owners. It's to their benefit to have a really strong school district, and they very well may be interested. And part of it is, I think, that nobody's ever asked them or explained to individuals that aren't parents that they can participate in public education. So think of it, think broadly. One thing that's really important when you think about a foundation board, because it is all volunteers, are all the different jobs that fall into that board. And so that's another way to think about who should I ask? Well, we don't have a CPA, and then you can think about the CPAs in your community and move in that direction. It gives you a little bit of focus, because everybody I know comes to the table and says, well, what about so-and-so and so-and-so? If you don't have focus, it's very hard to figure out how to move forward. And as for I've moved the slide ahead, but as for Board of Ed members or the superintendent or the BA serving on the foundation board, it is okay if they're non-voting. A lot of this comes down to perception. You do not want your community to perceive that one person or a small group of people have control over the school budget. Or the school spending. That's really what this comes down to. And it's important to have that diversity so that the perception is that the foundation is representing the community as a whole and not one person's agenda. So in really small districts, it's much harder to find individuals who aren't already serving on some of the community boards in some way. So a school district Board of Ed person can be on the foundation board. Generally recommend that they be non-voting. If they are the only administration representative on the foundation board and you want to make them a voting member, I think that's okay. You want to clearly define that in the bylaws, and you do not want any other individuals on that foundation board to be connected to the school district. I definitely recommend that if the superintendent wants to serve on the foundation board, that they be non-voting. Same with the business administrator or anybody else that people can perceive have too much control. It doesn't mean that they do. It's perception is almost more important than the law in those cases. So as you start thinking, who do we ask to become a board member for the foundation? And think about what skills are needed. Think about in some ways, it's almost like, what does it take to run this business? So come up with make a list and this could be, if you are at the stage where you just have a steering committee and you're not sure how this foundation is moving forward, you can make a list and say, okay, we need somebody that's an accountant. It's always helpful having a lawyer. If you know someone that has nonprofit experience, that's great too. Think about your community, and that's really, really important. What pockets in your community are important to represent on that foundation board? And it could be that you have, a large Hispanic community. Be sure that there's somebody from that community representing that group on your board. It could be a particular religious community. Whatever it is, be sure that you're thinking about the community at large and not just those that tend to be the leaders in your school district. When it comes to finding foundation board members, and I think one of the things that people say have a tendency to do is apologize when they ask someone to serve on a board, as if you're somehow putting them out or asking something that they're going to say no to. If you do that, they're going to say no. And think about yourself. If somebody comes to you and says, we really need someone to serve on this board, and I know you're busy, but would you be willing? And they ask in a way that makes it sound like they just need a warm body, that's what you're going to get, just a warm body. So it's important to say, phrase it in the positive. This is a great opportunity for you to have an impact on our public education system. Our district is really strong, but there are so many other great things we could be doing. And vet that candidate and talk to that candidate. And if they're genuinely interested in public education and they have a true interest in participating, then they're going to be a really good board member, and they're going to show up and they're going to do the work. And that's what's really important. A warm body is going to lead you to a board that's really tired really quick, and only a few people doing the heavy lifting, and that is a recipe for disaster. In 3 or 4 years, the foundation will be floundering. This is true for foundation boards that are currently existing and have, board members that have been serving for 10 years, and they say, I'm tired, I want out. Ask people in a positive way. Nobody wants to join a sinking ship, and that's true for fundraising too. Nobody wants to give money to a nonprofit that's about to die. So you need to always be thinking in the positive. To ask for, when you ask for a donation, you say you're going to make a really positive impact. This is a great opportunity to give a gift. So think of it in that positive way. And then be sure the people that are extending the invitation to join a board are the appropriate people. So if you're in the steering committee stage, so maybe your steering committee is made up of your superintendent, you're a community member, and a Board of Ed member. Decide who's inviting people, who is going to be the person to invite people to join the foundation board. It could be all of you. It could be a meeting in which invitations are extended, or potential board members fill out an application. We do that at NJFP. If people want to join our board, they have to fill out an application, just like a job. And then we have a governance committee that makes a formal invitation. So decide who the person is making those formal invitations. Part of that is so that things aren't being done in redundancy, and then also that there's a process in place. If you have an existing foundation and you have a board that is floundering and looking for new members, create a governance committee on that board and have those 2 or 3 people work exclusively on inviting new board members and reporting back to the larger board. That just helps keep things really clean. I just mentioned a governance committee. When you have a small foundation board, a lot of times people say we don't need committees, and that is true. It depends on your number of people and how you're operating. One committee that I would say is good to start in the early stages is a governance committee. And this is because not only will it help you build your board, it will help take care of the board. And if it's somebody's job to be sure that your board is moving forward in a way that people feel engaged and connected, and there is an exit strategy for board members, whether it be, term limits or pros and cons to term limits. We'll talk about that too. But having somebody mind that part of the business will keep you healthier in the long run. And understanding where the needs are for the board. And there are all kinds of rubrics you can find. You can also do self-assessments, which is wonderfully helpful. You may find that, you've asked the CPA to join your foundation board because they're a CPA and those are the skills that you need, but that person joined the board because they want to do something different than accounting. And so those self-assessments and those questions are really important to understand. Don't assume that somebody's joining a board because they want to do an extension of their day job. It might be because they want to try something new. So that's where the governance committee can come in and be really, really helpful. So this is a little bit, this slide here tells you what the job description is. And it's helpful to have. They report back, of course, to the larger board, and depending on how you set up the committee would depend on how much power they have in terms of committing and asking new board members. But it is a really, I think, important committee to have for long-term success. This is, just a little bit more. And one thing that's on here, this last bullet that says recommend the request for resignation or removal of a board member as appropriate. I think this is something that's really very tricky, but dead weight is, it's a weight for everybody. So if you have a foundation board with 7 board members and 2 never show up to meetings and the other 5 are showing up, it begins to kind of bring on a feeling that is negative. And so when you create your bylaws, there should be expectations in there for board members. And that can include everything from meeting attendance to our board members expected to make a personal donation. So all of those different things can be covered in your bylaws. And what's really important for those of you just starting now is to think about what is best for the organization in the long term. So you may have 3 people now that are really excited and they're showing up all the time, and you've got these other 4 board members and they never show up, and you don't really care because the 3 of you are happy working together. That sets a precedence. And when you all are tired, the expectation of other board members is we don't have to show up. So think about the problems before they come up. They're so much easier to solve problems and create policy when you don't have a problem. And it is important that if you have a board member that's not showing up, that the board president or whomever has been determined the right person, call them and say, you have not been participating. Can we ask why? Give them a chance to explain themselves, and then give them an out if they want it. And if ultimately it's really becoming a problem, the board can vote that person off. You obviously need to be careful in those situations, just for burning bridges, but that is something that is important. So when you talk about a foundation moving forward and growing, there are some really basic practices that need to happen. And it's easy when you're small to let these fall by the wayside, but they are critically important. And again, if you don't set the precedent of doing them from the get-go, it will be much harder in the long run. So there are some basic things that need to always be happening, minutes. And it's also really important, especially with education foundations, that appropriate people recuse themselves when necessary. So if you, for example, are voting on teacher grants, you have a stack of teacher grants in front of you, and one of your board members is deeply involved in one of the schools that's getting one of those grants, it might be appropriate for that person to recuse themselves, and the minutes should reflect that. Or if you're voting on something that, is specific to a business or a Board of Ed member, be sure to recuse yourselves and be sure the minutes reflect that correctly. Every single nonprofit needs to make their 990 available. They all live on a website called GuideStar. So anytime you have any question about any nonprofit anywhere, you can look at GuideStar and you will see their 990s. Any member of the community should be able to say to you, I'd like to see a copy of your 990, and every foundation should say, here you go. There should be no questions asked. Nonprofits must be transparent. And when people say, well, we don't want to share that was part of our private meeting, there are times when that is appropriate, but 9 times out of 10, the nonprofit should be willing to share every piece of information that's being asked for. So just be aware that is how a nonprofit operates, and it must operate that way. These are just a few tips on engaging new board members. Actually, before I go into this, I just want to stop. I know this is a lot of information. Are there any questions? Am I going too fast? Anything that anybody has? If not, I'll keep on going. Okay. So engaging new board members. This is really important, and I also just encourage you to think about your own experiences. When you walk into a new place, if nobody says hello to you, you suddenly feel like an outsider. Or if everybody is sitting down next to, their close friend and chatting, and you're sitting there quietly, it's difficult for that person to feel engaged or like they want to continue to participate. So every new board member should have a job description. What is expected to be a board member? So now you know kind of what's expected of you. The current board, if there's a new board member coming on, should have an understanding of what that person's interests are, so they can bring that person into the fold. Very helpful to give new board members minutes from previous meetings so that they are aware of what's being discussed, because of course you don't want to waste valuable board meeting time, rehashing history over and over. Assigning them a board buddy is a great way just to make the person feel connected. Name tags at every meeting, I think, are really helpful. Even if you think everybody knows everybody's name, it just eliminates any awkwardness. If somebody doesn't come to many meetings, at least they know, the name of who's who is helpful. And including bios of board members is also really helpful, so that they can begin to make a connection of who are these people serving on the foundation board. And then, of course, finding the right committee or the right fit for that board member. And like I said, the CPA may not want to do accounting as a volunteer job. They may want to do that only in their paid job. So those are things that should be vetted before they join the board, and then everybody has clear expectations and knows where this person might fit in. But if current board members don't take the time to engage new board members, you will lose them quickly. And then you'll 6 months later be saying, why can't we get new board members? This might be one of the reasons. And it seems so simple, or seems like something you naturally happens, but it does not always naturally happen. So be thoughtful of this process. As I just said, be sure that every board member understands what is expected of them. And as you create that mission for your foundation, so your mission in some way, shape, or form is going to be to raise funds to support the school district and its top priorities. That is the first and most important thing at every decision. And every board member should understand that mission and be clear about it. Like I said in the beginning, if your foundation is not raising money for athletics and somebody comes and says, well, we need a new school board, is that scoreboard, does that really fit into the foundation's mission? Is that something the foundation wants to fund? It can. It can decide as a board, you know what, we got to change this because our school district has changed. We need to be funding athletics now. We can't just be funding what we thought was our original mission. You can change that. But any change you make, those are the guiding principles with the decisions that you make. So the board needs to understand that, and the board needs to understand clear priorities. And that's what will help the organization make the best decisions to move the organization forward and not get sidetracked. You know, there are lots of great programs out there, and sometimes saying no isn't saying it's not a great program. It's staying true to your priorities. So, you know, if a donor shows up and says, we're going to give you $30,000 for Chinese immersion, and that sounds wonderful and it's going to be a great program, but if that is not a priority for your school district, the foundation board needs to say, no, this doesn't fit into our priorities right now in our mission. Because if you get sidetracked and you start funding all these little bits and parts and pieces, you lose the essence of who you are as an organization. It makes it very confusing, and then people no longer know what they're really working on. Every single foundation board member should be involved in fundraising. I've been in fundraising a long time. It does not bother me to ask people for money. I'm not asking them for a personal loan. I'm asking them to make a contribution to public education. I'm giving them the opportunity to make a difference. That's how I look at it. It's very, it's very different than saying, can I personally borrow money? That's not what you're asking. You're asking to change and make an impact on your school district. I understand that many people are not comfortable asking for money. So if you have some, board members that say, I really don't want to ask for money, can they help you make the introduction? Do they know someone that they can say, why don't I invite so-and-so to lunch and we'll all go together? And then which person's going to make the ask for the money. And remember, fundraising is like dating. You don't just ask, someone to marry you on the first date. You build a relationship, and that makes fundraising a whole lot easier. So, it could be that a foundation board member has a connection that's really good, and you think we really should ask, Mr. Jones for $10,000 for STEM. Maybe it starts by that board member saying, I'd like to invite you over to the school so you can see the science lab we want to work on. That's it. Nobody asked for money. Then it's maybe, we'd like to invite you to this event. And then somebody else can make the ask if you're not comfortable making that ask. But that board member opened the door for you. So every single board member needs to be thinking about fundraising. And actually, it's probably, as the reality is, I don't think there's more money coming from the state. So it's probably something the school district also needs to think about as well. The superintendent is, having that mindset of inviting, being part of some of those meetings, the superintendent, for example, showing a donor around, not asking for money, not doing anything, just providing that access really will go a long way in a donor's mind. So something to keep in mind. These bullets right here are an entire webinar in and of itself. I have done it before. It's probably living somewhere in the school board's website. Every single nonprofit should have these policies. And I recommend that every school district know that their foundation has these policies and that they see and understand these policies. Bylaws should be reviewed annually by the nonprofit foundation. They can be amended and changed at any time with board approval. Conflict of interest is just critically important when it comes to an education foundation because of that partnership with a government entity. Gift acceptance policy really important because the school district is a steward of that money. So whoever is accepting that gift needs to understand, if, like I said, back to the earlier example, if one individual on the foundation board accepts that gift of $20,000 for a Chinese immersion program, they've now accepted a restricted gift. That gift has to be executed in the way in which the donor intended. So there should be a gift acceptance policy that says, the board looks at it and goes, wow, and it's usually a dollar amount. It's usually a restricted gift when this comes into play, not just a $50 contribution for unrestricted funds. That foundation boards, 2 or 3 people look at it and go, gosh, it's a lot of money, but it's really one of our priorities. And then if they think, yes, maybe, then the district should look at it and go, can we accept this gift? Is this one of our priorities, or is this taking us off track? And don't be shy about going back to a donor and saying, we really love this idea. It's not a priority in the district. Have you thought about this? Would you be willing to contribute to a different program? Document retention policy is basically what it says, and same with whistleblower. Again, just those policies need to exist. They need to be updated. And there are PowerPoints that I've done on all of those, so you can learn more there. Succession planning for your board, like I said, this is critical, and it's really hard to do, and it seems like something that you can do at the next meeting and the next meeting and the next meeting, and then 5 or 6 years have passed, and you're still realizing you never did a succession plan. Nonprofit boards can choose to have term limits or not. There are pros and cons to term limits. I personally think term limits are helpful. Typically on a foundation or nonprofit board, it would be a 3-year term. That's pretty typical. If you're having a hard time recruiting board members, I think going to 1 or 2 years is fine too, because it doesn't feel like as much of a commitment. And sometimes that makes people feel a little bit more comfortable. The downside, of course, of term limits is you could get to the end of 3 years and have a really strong board member that nobody wants this person to leave the board, in which case you can decide, do they get voted on for another term? You could have a policy where after X amount of years, that person has to step off for 1 year and then they can come back on the board. There's lots of ways to create term limits or figure out how you want to do succession planning, but it is worthy of understanding the pros and cons to both. But one of the things I do think is helpful, especially if you have a brand new board, is some short term limits, 1, 2, 3 years. And then people don't feel overwhelmed committing to something. And if 3 years in, an individual really wants to stay and they're making a great impact, then you can amend your bylaws to adjust for that. And again, the whole board would be approving that. So if it's a board member that, is a problem, then the board can say, no, we want term limits. And that is a benefit to term limits, of course, is that it also forces people off a board if they are, a problem. Just ideas of where to find board members. It's a daunting task. It doesn't have to be, but think big. Think who is participating currently in public education. Did a parent just have a child age out of the district and they were a really involved PTO or PTA member? Is there the bagel shop or a business that always is contributing to, Little League, or they're donating food? Would they be a good fit? Ask for recommendations. Talk to teachers and administrators and say, who do you think would be a good fit? And, I really, really encourage you to think beyond on the parent pool. I mean, the parents are such an obvious pool. And that's true for donors too. Think beyond on the parents. Or if you've noticed someone that's consistently been giving money to the school district in a lot of different ways, there's somebody you might want to ask and think about too. So just some ideas, and maybe, maybe take this list to a steering committee meeting or a board meeting and ask the people in that group to see if they can name 2 or 3 people in some of these categories, or say, oh gosh, I'm going to ask that assistant principal. He might have some good ideas just because of however, a personality or someone's involvement in the district is. So this way, if you have a list and decide how you're going to ask people, it's targeted and it's a thoughtful process, as opposed to everybody sitting in the room throwing out ideas and nobody actually taking on the task or the assignment. You can also, which I do recommend, especially if you have a foundation that has not started yet or is really floundering, to set up a local meeting. You could do it as part of, before or after a Board of Ed meeting, if your Board of Ed meetings are well attended, or you could do it as part of another community meeting. You can send out information through the district, if there's a newsletter or whatever ways the district communicates out to the larger community, to say that you're looking for board members, explaining what the foundation does and why the foundation is going to be critical to your school district. And then these 2 links just take you to a couple places in New Jersey that are a little bit of a clearinghouse for, potential volunteers. And don't be afraid to look outside of your district. If you're in a small district, there might be someone in a neighboring town that's really interested in and willing to donate their time. If so, great. There's no reason to, think just because they're half a block away, they might be interested in, who knows, something else that just happens not to be your district. These are just some self-reflection questions for foundations that have existing boards that say we can't find board members. Just some things to think about and reflect on yourselves, and decide, are you doing any of these things? Or some of these, I had mentioned the term lengths. If it's a 3-year term length, does that seem too long for people when you ask them? And are you asking them because you have too much to do? Is there not enough to do? Is there good leadership in the foundation? If there's not good leadership, maybe figure out how you develop that leadership, and then it becomes a more appealing ask. So these questions are really a way for you to evaluate maybe some reasons why you're not able to find foundation board members. So the collaboration, this is really, I can't stress enough how important it is for the school district and the foundation to be the best of friends and the best collaborators and the loudest cheerleader for each other. If you're on the district side and you're not working well with your foundation, or if you're on the foundation side and you're not working well with your district, I can guarantee you will not succeed. And what I would highly recommend is you figure out a way that you can come together. And it might be, if there's a trust issue, it might be that you have to start really small. Also, this is where really good policies are very helpful, because they say, well, we're going to do this. And remember that there will be turnover on the district side, and there's going to be turnover on the foundation side. So we've also done entire presentations on collaboration. But what there's put some parameters in place. It might be that at every Board of Ed meeting, the foundation president speaks for 4 minutes on the state of the foundation. And it might be at every foundation, board meeting, somebody from the district comes for the first 5 minutes and says, this is what's going on in the district. Without a doubt, at least twice a year, I would recommend much more, but at least twice a year, the foundation and the district should be coming together to talk about priorities. If the foundation does not clearly understand the district's priorities, it just makes it really hard to raise money, and it makes it really hard to manage that money. So create those roles and sense of who's doing what. There are some districts that are doing this so well. And when the superintendent and the school district is willing to send out a remind notice saying, remember the foundation has an event on Friday night, what that says to your community is that the district values that foundation. And if you believe in your school district, then you should value that foundation too. It's the, seal of approval, and vice versa. When the school district has a great success, maybe it has nothing to do with the foundation. The foundation should be cheering for the school district and saying, we want to share this great news along with our school district that, we've done something wonderful. So there's lots of different ways to do this. I think creating some policies and putting them on paper, or some roles and responsibilities and putting them on paper, is not only a good way to make it clear as to who's doing what, but as turnover happens, the expectations for collaboration and for sharing information will be in place so that it doesn't get, somebody says, oh, well, I don't want to do that. There is an expectation. And, that communication is key, and understanding that the district needs to understand the foundation is a nonprofit, and the foundation needs to understand that it's the district's job to be the educators and the execution of a lot of those gifts. But if you are each other's biggest cheerleaders, the long-term success is so much easier, and it's so much easier to find board members, and it's so much easier to raise money because everybody's come together for a really strong purpose, and keeping those lines of communication open in both ways are really, really critically important. One other thing I just want to mention is community partners, and the foundation can give funds to other nonprofits. And an example of that, as long as it fulfills their mission, an example would be the school district probably knows that they have 10 children that are in a homeless shelter or don't have permanent residence. The district could say to the foundation, we would like you to provide, or can you provide 10 backpacks full of supplies to this nonprofit? And that nonprofit can be sure that those kids go to school with their backpacks full of supplies. Or it could be, something relating to glasses or transportation. There are lots of different ways that community partners also support the school district, and the foundation can help fund those organizations. It's not that the foundation only gives money to the school district, in the same way that the school district can also receive, grants and things as well, usually federal and state, just because they're a government entity. I know this has been a tremendous amount of information. Questions, my contact information is here. NJP is a member organization. We currently have about 55 members. We do in-person meetings and webinars like these throughout the year, and a lot of networking and connecting education foundations around the state. So that's the benefit of being a member, as well as just a resource, because running a foundation is a lot of work. It's not for the faint of heart, and there will be problems, but we hopefully are here to guide you and answer questions. So with that, any questions?
Thank you, Megan. We'll keep it open for a couple minutes if anybody wants to type in a question or raise their hand, and we can unmute you. Just a reminder that this webinar is being recorded, and you will be getting a copy of it, like I said, probably most likely tomorrow. We ask you to share this information that you receive to other members within your district or your foundation. It's some good information, and it's valuable for others to hear. And like Megan said prior, we are taping every webinar that we do. If you go to njsba.org, that's our website. If you go into the training field, you will see webinars, and you can search all the webinars that we did, all the foundation webinars, technology webinars, policy, legal. They're all there. Just search. Like Megan said, if you go back and listen to one of her other webinars, you get some other information on the policies and stuff like that. Not seeing any questions coming in. Is there anything you want to say in closing, Megan?
Nope, I think that's it. Reach out to me if anyone has questions, and wishing you all a very happy holiday and Happy New Year.
Okay, thank you again. And like I said, Megan's information is on the screen here, and it will be on your email that you're going to be receiving tomorrow. Thank you very much for joining us today, and like piggyback off of what Megan said, and have a great holiday season. Thank you. Bye.